Okay, welcome everybody to Industrial Plankton Algae Bioreactor presentation, virtual tour, and Q&A. We are pleased today to have Robert Roulston, the CEO of Industrial Plankton, JB Hastey, the owner of Nova Harvest, and we have Sean, who will be answering all the questions and answers, and Ashley, she's in charge of business development. Before we start, I introduce Robert Roulston. Robert Roulston founded Industrial Plankton in 2010. Robert holds a BSc Biology from McGill University and a Bachelor of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Victoria. Robert has always had the passion of aquatic aquarism and is an avid marine aquarist with a background of industrial automation. His drive to create innovative live feed equipment was born when he recognized that producing quality live feed was a bottleneck for many aquaculture species that could be solved with automation. His company, Industrial Plankton, has developed live feed equipment for producing algae and zooplankton with the focus of maintaining a stable, biosecure culture environment. Robert hopes that by delivering user-friendly and biosecure live feed technology, Industrial Plankton can help stabilize the base of aquaculture food chain and assist with the global food production of sustainable seafood. Okay, I will introduce JP Hastey before we start the session. JP Hastey founded Nova Harvest over 9 years ago, building his shellfish hatchery from the ground up. He put his education, a BSc in biology and MSc in animal science, to hard work, as he innovated growing Nova Harvest through a combination of experimentation and tenacity. JP is recognized as one of Canada's leaders in shellfish aquaculture and was even recognized for it globally as one of the Hatchery International top 10 under 40. He is on the board of directors for the British Columbia Shellfish Growers Association and volunteers on many community non-profit boards in the coastal community of Bountiful, BC, where JP and Nova Harvest call home. JP was Industrial Plankton's first customer. As his operation has grown, he has continued to add photobioreactors to his hatchery and now has 6 units, including those original 2 from 2012. Along with constantly improving his hatchery, his sights are set on improving the scalability of his entire shellfish aquaculture industry and has recently made moves to this with his vertical expansion into oyster farming. Without further ado, can I introduce Robert Roulston, present Industrial Plankton. Robert, over to you.
Great. So you guys can see my presentation now?
Yes. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, so this is Industrial Plankton. This is one of our older reactors, but it's a nice picture. Yeah, our vision for Industrial Plankton is that aquaculture and biotech have never been more critical to the world's survival for the next couple of 100 years at least. And our aim is to develop cutting-edge technologies that help stabilize the foundations of these industries, which is what we've been working on for the past 10 years. Start out back in 2006, I was just breeding marine fish, propagating corals, paying my rent off selling corals to people in the local environment, and got really interested in ecosystems and specifically the microbial ecosystems. And then Ashley and I founded Industrial Plankton in 2010, raised a little bit of money and attempted to develop a closed loop multi-trophic ecosystem. So used algae and then fed algae to zooplankton, rotifers, and artemia, and then fed those to fish. So it was supposed to be a system where you could plug it into the wall and fish come out the other end. And we were pretty naive and young at the time, 10 years ago, so we learned quite a bit. But in doing this for a year and wasting about $100,000, we learned a lot about algae and zooplankton, and then realized the complex part of it is the same part that's really complex for a lot of marine hatcheries. And so specifically on the algae side, they don't have good control over temperature, pH, light, and biosecurity in general. And that leads to cell death, even if you think your culture is growing well. if you get a big spike in temperature or pH and a portion of your culture dies, you have some dead and decaying cells in there. And that gives a substrate for pathogenic bacteria to grow. And then you end up feeding pathogenic bacteria to your larval animals, which are incredibly sensitive at that stage. That leads to higher mortality and lower yields overall for your hatchery. So that's what we identified about 9 years ago, after our first year of trying to develop a multi-trophic ecosystem. And once we identified that, we moved on to, all right, how do we coalesce this into a single unit with nice controls, a sealed unit that's self-cleaning with good biosecurity. So back in 2011, we developed our first prototype of this system. And then we started to get some commercial interest. So we developed our actual commercial version. And the 2 units shown here are actually the very 2 first units we built, which are at JP's facility, who's on the call as well. And they're still operating to this day, which is fairly amazing, considering what we knew 9 years ago. So in total, we built 6 of that generation. At that point, we moved on to a larger facility. Things were going well, so developed a bit of infrastructure and then started actually perfecting the design. So this was our previous version, the old 1,000 liter, and we built 22 of those from 2015 to 2016. And they worked quite well, but the amount of biomass we could get out of them compared to the capital cost wasn't quite where we wanted it, where we thought we could actually get a lot of sales. And so then we redesigned it so that we could get much more biomass out of with a fairly negligible increase in capital cost. So we redesigned the tank to actually massively increase the surface area to volume ratio. And so the algae inside your tank gets a lot more light. It gets penetrated much deeper into the dark zones, and then you end up with much more cells produced per liter. Per liter of culture volume. And so this was our initial version, and we built 20 of those, and they actually worked quite well. And then once we realized they were working quite well, we really buckled down and commercialized it even more. And so this is actually our current version. So in 2018, we refined it even further. Added a side tank which pre-filters the water coming in, so UV sterilizes and ultra filters the water, so it comes in incredibly pure to the reactor, which was something before we were dealing with clients, and the clients have variable water coming into the reactors, so we just decided to add a module so that we always ensured that very clean water was coming into the reactor. And then we built 65 of those units, from 2018 to 2020. So to date, we've built 65 of the current versions, and they're working very well all over the world. In terms of sales, so for the first 4 years, it was more or less R&D, just refining our initial product, which went quite well up to about 2016. And then we started to think we could get a lot more sales if we actually improve the cost effectiveness of this unit. And that's the point where we moved to the LED lights in the large cone reactor. And then, around 2017, once we realized that was actually working very well for our clients, we super refined it, and that's our current product. And sales have been ramping pretty hard since 2016. In terms of global installs, predominantly in North America, and then in the last few years, we've started to spread out for other parts of the world, a little bit into South America for shrimp farming, Europe for more on the biotech side in Europe, and then Australia and New Zealand on the shellfish farming side, as well as a number of clients in the Middle East, more on the shrimp farming side for that as well. So initially we were focused on shellfish farming since they're the largest consumers of algae, but in recent years, shrimp farming has actually caught our attention. We have a number of clients in the shrimp farming industry as well. So all told, we sold now over 100 reactors into 18 countries. And I know a lot of you are here for the Rotifer system. So the Rotifer system, we started to develop in 2016. So we developed a small scale prototype. And then 2018, 2019, we actually developed a full scale prototype. So this is about a 2,000 liter system. And the big part of this system is one tank is for growing the rotifers. The other tank is a large biofilter for introducing beneficial heterotrophic bacteria. And in the main culture tank, the one on the left, it has an automated spray cleaning system. So it actually removes particulate organic waste actively on an ongoing basis, as well as uses a micron back flushing filter. So you can remove the water from that tank, process it through a foam fractionator and then a biofilter and return it to the tank. So it's cleaned of organic waste, but still has beneficial bacteria in the water. And so that is a significant stabilizing effect to the overall biosecurity of the rotifers being produced. So this was our beta prototype of the 2,000 liter system, which we ran 2 years ago. And currently this is our new system, which I'll take you guys in the back momentarily. But this is currently built and operating in our facility. So this is again about a 2,000 liter system with the goal of producing 1 billion rotifers a day of L type, or about 1.5 billion of S type. The main culture tank's 1,000 liters, so the math just goes really well with 1,000 liters and 5,000 rotifers per mill and 1 billion production per day. So it was partially designed around easy math, but also it was very convenient floor space and ability to fit in a shipping container. So everything just tied together really well. And we expect to start shipping these in the next few months. We're just doing our final trials in-house, and then it's going out to a facility next month here in BC. And they do sablefish production, so a marine finfish, and consume they go through about 3 to 4 billion rotifers per day. So they're going to trial our system with their animals and test their survival. Yeah, so that's the company intro. If there's any questions, we did one of these the other day, and it was very convenient if you just post them in chat, and then we pound through them all at the end.
So what I was actually planning to do here is I'll share screen. I have just a quick little video that gives it's about 1.5 minutes that gives a summary just of our operation. So what I guess a takeaway for that for people to do is just to get a feel for like the size of operation we have, and that'll kind of help if you're fielding questions about how we do make use of industrial plankton bioreactors. So I'll just share screen now and we can play that video. We started as a geoduck hatchery. I've got a quick presentation here that's just pictures. Okay, so I've got just a few pictures here to click through kind of our evolution in relation to the industrial plankton bioreactors. So we initially started as a geoduck hatchery and have since transitioned into oyster. Oyster is a lot higher biomass to have under management at any one time. And so we actually have been adding bioreactors for the last 3 years to increase our production capabilities. And that has been working incredibly well for us. We started with one reactor. That was back in 2012, as Robert was saying. So that was the first reactor produced by Industrial Plankton. So we were really fortunate to be just 3 hours down the road and also starting a hatchery at the same time. So using that technology was really important for me. And I think this is just something that is important to highlight for people listening, in that depending on like where you're at in your business or how you plan to be using algae culture, or how you're currently using it, or what your goals are to increase production, something that we found incredibly useful for us with reactors, even with earlier models, is just how it enabled us to leverage trained staff and scale algae culture without having to add individuals that are highly trained. So we now have, and just to kind of clarify that, so something that's really important in operating bioreactors is the cleanliness of your initial inoculums. So that's something that what was a big challenge for us in starting out is actually having and maintaining that level of expertise within the company, as we're in a really remote area. Attracting staff can be quite difficult, and that is one of the most important individuals in our facility, is those that manage and curate our algae cultures. So finding those individuals, they're incredibly valuable in our area of the world, and I assume that's similar to others that are on the call. And so what we can do is we continuously, with reactors, be expanding our production without having to add new individuals or new staff that are highly trained. And so that's kind of the approach we've taken to algae culture as we've grown our business. And so moving on into the next, that's just a quick view of our hatchery floor. So what you'll kind of notice, each picture I'm showing you is kind of an evolution or a new kind of iteration of the hatchery for us. So I started knowing almost nothing about this and just kind of learn as I went. So there's a lot of trial and error that went into where I've got today in hatchery and algae culture. So and as I was saying before, how we've been able to grow and expand our business is purely through addition of bioreactors. So I kind of view hatcheries as you're ultimately just converting algae biomass into a product that you can sell. And so that is ultimately our limiting resource, is how many cells we produce per day. And we convert that into, say, oyster larvae. And that's what we sell on to our customers. So as we're evolving, you can see now we have the 2 reactors, and then we went to kind of a small scale bag culture, and then you see columns of batch culture on the left. So we were actually just trying all of this, as I didn't really know what I was doing. I was trying to learn which is the best technique, or which one is more stable or scalable for us. And as you see, as you go through, we've actually then kind of moved the bags down. We started adding new reactors, and you can kind of see like what was winning. So reactors are how we have been adding that capacity. So I just took this picture today. So now we've got 3 1200 or 1250 liter bioreactors. We've got 2 of our original 1000s that were from 2012 that are still in use. We use those every day when we're in season. And we also have 1,000 liter. So we have actually one of every generation of the industrial plankton bioreactors. And the 1250s just have been incredibly impressive units to use. So having used all 3 of them, I've experienced some of the issues that maybe were in some of the earlier models, and have also seen those solved. So the 1250s I've been using for about a year now, maybe a year and a half since we got the first one. And those have just been incredible machines for us. You can see our floor space there. That's our main culture area. We unfortunately culture our algae directly where we have our larvae, which in general, it could be a problem, but we have, in the last year of operating the 1250s, have had no contamination issues within those vessels. And it's been the stability of algae that comes out of that, the consistency of the culture is something that if I had more floor space right now, I'd be adding more machines, but that's just a bigger problem for me to solve moving forward. As our capacity has currently exceeded what our market can bear in Canada here. So we're unfortunately having to look for new markets just so we can continue to increase production. But just to touch again on so for the reactors, how we actually manage these is we culture, we do 4-liter cultures and 4-liter or gallon jugs that we autoclave and inoculate. Those are the cultures we use to inoculate reactors. So everything has been autoclaved before it goes into a reactor. So those that are using reactors for the first time, you can't overemphasize how important that initial culture quality is, as these machines will keep your culture clean if you do not contaminate it yourself. So that's something that we've have seen and it has been proven to us as we were using reactors. So the early ones we were using, there was from time to time we would have contamination issues in water quality as it entered the machine. All of those problems have been solved now. We use hollow fiber membrane filtration on the way on seawater that goes to the machines. That's something I highly recommend. It's very cost effective to get into nowadays. You don't have to be using pasteurization, and then using this kind of the stock filtration that comes with the reactors. It also maintains those filters. You get a lot longer lifespan out of the filtration that comes stock on the reactor, and it reduces your consumable cost as well. And we have so right now, what we use for our algae culture at a small facility like ours, we do batches of around 60 to 80 million eyed larvae for oyster. We used to have about 1.5 technicians for algae culture, and in adding just the 3 1250s to our operation, that's been reduced to less than a half. So that we were able to remove essentially an entire individual from our operation, which is massive for us. And that's something where we're at the point now where I'm not even sure what the upper limit of adding reactors to be that we can manage, but it would be quadruple or more before we would have to actually add an individual to manage those machines, a new individual to manage those machines. And that's kind of all I have for the presentation. So maybe just stop there. And if there's questions, I was kind of figured the most value I could add to individuals is just, firsthand experience using the machines and what maybe concerns they have about getting into a machine, or how to think about fitting one into a facility or something like that.
Thanks, JP. That's an awesome picture. I hadn't seen it before. Well, I guess you just took it today. So
I just took it about 25 minutes ago.
Thank you, JP. Yeah. So there are a few questions that's on the board. First questions from Singapore, Stella Chia. Hi, can I know the power consumption? Does it take up high electricity power for your photo algae bioreactor?
Yeah, so it's much more efficient than if you're growing it with fluorescent lights. It takes about 2,400 watts per unit, but then replaces about 30 or so bags. So overall, in terms of cells produced, it's quite efficient, but it's still a decent chunk of power, 2,400 watts, if you're running it at 100% lights. Yeah, it's all LED lights, so that's been very helpful in reducing our power consumption. But we are blasting a lot of light into these things to make them grow.
Second questions come from Ram Raj of India. What are the species currently produced in the reactor and the density achieved? How about the downstream process if one wants to make an algae paste?
So I guess I'll probably field that one. So we culture pretty much, well, we've cultured almost every commonly aquacultured species in the PBRs. So name a few: Skeletonema, Isochrysis, Catosceris, Thelysiocyra, I could go on a fair bit, but we have a pretty comprehensive list on our website, which I'll type in and answer for it shortly. And then in terms of densities, most densities that we achieve are in excess of what you get in a carboy with a continuous harvest. So obviously talking about Nanochloropsis versus Tetraselmis, those are orders of magnitude different in size. So the densities that you achieve will be kind of greatly different. In terms of downstream process, if you want to take it and turn it into a paste, I don't know if JP wants to talk to that at all, but they're basically the PBRs produce a fairly dense algae, but then after that you'll need to dewater it to make it into a paste.
Yeah. If I just jump in there, Sean, as well.
Let's start the virtual tour, Robert.
Yeah, and we can deal with questions later
tour before we do the question and answers.
Okay. Yeah. So do all the questions all at once at the end.
Sure. Yeah.
Probably answer a few questions in the meantime as well, in terms of seeing the equipment first.
Grab Jen and Stu. Oh. Yeah, so this is our office in general. There's a lot of bioreactors back there. Yeah, so Jen was going to give you a walkthrough on some of the features of the PBR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's start with the cleaning. So I'll show you at the reactor over here. So I think one of our most popular features is our automated cleaning cycle, because it really reduces the amount of time and effort you have to spend on cleaning the tanks. So let's say that you had your algae culture, you drained it all out. The next thing you want to do is clean the tank. So to do this, you just add some water and the cleaning agent of your choice. So either an acid, base for biofilm removal, or bleach if you want to sanitize the tank. And then you just press the button to run the spray cycle. So I'll show you that now. Nope, that didn't help. Yeah, so it's a little hard to see, but it just looks like basically the inside of what you think a dishwasher would look like, where it sprays all the interior surfaces, and that helps get things really clean. So next, I'll show you the next step, which would be inoculation. So we'll go over here. And also usually before you sanitize your tank with bleach, you would autoclave the tubing and the filters to make sure that those are sterile as well. Really see, we have a suite of 0.1 micron filters to keep anything going into the PBR clean. So this is my reactor that I'm ready to inoculate. I use the manual controls to add the amount of water and the amount of nutrients that I want, so that I have my media in there ready to go. It's bubbling. I have my lights, my pH, my temperature, all of that how I want. And then to actually inoculate, I have a carboy down here. And so we have these autoclavable connectors. So to actually inoculate, you just have to disinfect the connectors with some alcohol, snap them together, and then I'm just going to run the pump to pull the carboy into the reactor. I won't bore you with doing the whole thing. So if you have your whole algae carboy in there to start, and you have your 200 liters or so of media to begin with, the next thing you'll need to do is scale up your volume. So there's a couple different options for doing that. Like I demonstrated before with adding the media, you can manually add nutrients and water just by pressing a button whenever you want. My personal favorite option is this automated scale up and dilution. So we have a relative density sensor, which indicates the concentration of the algae in the tank. So what you can do is you can set the reactor, basically tell it that anytime my density hits 1, I want you, or whatever density you so choose, I want you to add a certain amount of water, a certain amount of nutrients, and then that way the reactor will just automatically dilute your culture whenever it hits that set density. So that's really convenient because it fills up your reactor for you without having to pay too much close attention. The third option for scaling up is continuously. So we have just a flow meter, so you can increase the continuous flow into the reactor. And then you can also set the hourly nutrient addition rate, so that just every hour it'll add a certain amount of nutrients, and then just constantly it'll be adding water. So this allows the volume to fill up continuously, and that's also really convenient as well. I think I'll show you next stuff on our floor reactor over here.
What's this growing?
So this is growing Catastris, and as I was just describing, the continuous flow for scale up, that's also really useful for harvesting. So you can have continuous flow and continuous nutrient additions, so you're constantly overflow harvesting. And I find that's really good for diatoms like this Catastris or Glossiosida or whatever kind of diatom you're going to grow, because this means you can dilute them pretty quickly without having to constantly be keeping an eye on them. And that way you can keep those faster growing species growing quickly throughout the whole time you're culturing them. So yeah, continuous harvest is just the same mechanism as continuous scale up. We also have, again, a couple options for other ways to harvest. We try and make the design as flexible as possible to suit different customers with different needs. So like with the water addition, you can also just harvest manually. This is using the paraceltic pump, the same one that we use to inoculate with. I'll just show you that here. So algae harvesting. You can just set whatever volume you want to harvest, press the button. I find that's really useful for collecting samples. Another popular feature is we have a scheduling option. So you can schedule just at the time and the volume of a harvest that you want to do. And then you could harvest in the morning before you even get there, and your algae's waiting for you when you come in. So that's pretty convenient as well. I'll talk a little bit about the controls that we have. So as your algae scales up and gets denser, you might want to change the light. I've got it pretty high right now, but you can turn it down or turn it up. It's just on a 0 to 100% scale. And that's what's shown in this yellow line here. We also have pH control. So the pH set point is also just via this touch screen. And then the reactor will automatically dose CO2 as the pH increases from the algae consuming it. And we also have temperature control, which is there. Relative density, I already mentioned, that's that green trace here. Volume, we just have a volume sensor to tell you how full your tank is. That's shown in the dark blue there. And then nutrient additions. So this can either be manual or set by the scale up, as I mentioned before, or just continuously every hour. And that's shown in this purple trace here. So it's really nice to have real-time, continuously logged data. It's great to be able to see your data, but it's especially good for troubleshooting. So for example, earlier this week, I will show you. So yeah, it's pretty easy to customize what you're seeing on the graph. You can change the time scale you're looking at or which traces you want to see. But I will show you. So you can see there's this pretty obvious, this orange trace is the CO2. So you can see there's a pretty obvious straight line and then there's this crazy shape. And what that is when our CO2 tank actually ran out on the weekend. So because we have the continuous data, it's pretty easy to see when something like that happens and to address it, hopefully before anything goes really wrong. So our pH didn't go up too high before we caught it and fixed the problem. So that's really helpful. Another thing also good for troubleshooting is remote access. So we have a feature where you can log in from your phone or whatever device you want to this control panel. And not only can you see what's going on, you can also adjust things just like if you were standing in front of the reactor itself. So this is really nice if you want to, oh, sorry, was Sean changing something? Sean was changing something. I'll allow it. You can also battle with people and these things.
Yeah, so Sean's logged in. He's in California right now, and we're on the west coast of Canada. But
so he just turned my lights up to 85, which is good. So if you're watching something scale up from home, You can just turn those lights up as you need to, which is really convenient. I think that's everything I can think of to talk about here. So I think maybe now we'll give you a quick preview of our new Rotifer system, which is quite exciting. So we'll try and stay out of the room a little because it's a little loud. But like with our algae, we've tried to make this like require as little labor as possible and be as automated as possible. So you can see that there's a similar control system where we have temperature control, pH control. Since they're rotifers, they're not consuming CO2, they're producing it. So we're actually adding bicarbonate to control the pH. We're also monitoring oxygen. We have an oxygen cone that's continuously adding oxygen as well as aeration. And we also have our food fridge. We've used a couple different kinds of food with our system. Right now we're running Sparkle, which seems to be working pretty well. The food is automatically refrigerated and stirred, so that's pretty convenient. We have, unlike our algae, we are filtering our water, our rotifer tank water, to keep it clean for the rotifers. So our rotifers are in this tank here, but we have an automated self-cleaning particulate filter to remove any particles that build up. And we have a self-cleaning filter to get the water out of the rotifer tank and bring it over here to our protein simmer to remove any dissolved solids and dissolved organics. And then we also have this big biofilter here, which breaks down any ammonia produced by the rotifers. Hopefully that's a good overview then.
Yeah, we can come back in if anyone has any specific questions and needs to see anything, but
Sounds good.
yeah, we can go in for some questions now.
You're finished. There are many questions. Actually, I put in Tony Charles from Australia. He has several questions. So, Tony, can you ask the questions? Turn on your voice, Tony.
Yes, I can't remember what questions I actually wrote down. Yes, spare parts. Obviously, where I'm logging in from Australia, we're a fair way away from Canada, as are other people from different parts of Asia on this call. What about the questions about the availability and the cost of shipping of spare parts and maintenance of these PBRs if I were to purchase one in Australia? I'm just concerned about the upkeep on these PBRs.
Yeah, so a lot of clients end up opting for a yearly service package, which you also get software updates, remote access, etc. things. But a big part of it is an ongoing warranty as well as a yearly care package. And so we just package up all the parts that you need and ship it to you once a year. So that'll have filters, peristaltic pump tubing, all the hard consumables, but we don't supply the liquid consumables like nutrients and starter algae cultures, since that's very challenging to ship across borders, as well as cleaning chemicals. But all the actual physical hard parts, we ship across all kinds of international borders. But yeah, the actual cost obviously varies depending on what border you're shipping across.
If I could add to that, Robert, the SPAT NZ down in New Zealand had a similar concern in terms of their kind of import duties and just general support. And they've been kind of wowed to a point that they're, considering PBRs as a very permanent solution, and kind of that aspect of things has not been an issue to them in terms of its 18-hour or so time difference. So we're talking to them usually at 6 p.m. at night. But we're still able to support and send parts to them. Obviously, we can't just drive 3 hours like we do to JP's facility, but the technology is much more stable and doesn't require that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. So the other question I had was a couple of questions. We have ozonated NUV filtered water going into our current algae lab, and we also filter down to 0.5 micron. Do we need to purchase the side tank? Is that an optional part of the purchase package?
Yeah, the side tank is included as a standard, but we can subtract it for special cases if people already have, very good water. Yeah, we just found that many people didn't, but yeah, we can slice that off for sure. Yeah, we've done that for a couple of customers already when they do actually have good water already available. So
Lovely.
yes.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah, thanks very much. I think I had one more question, but I've forgotten what that one was now. So I'll get off the airways and let someone else ask a question.
Okay, Taslim Mohammed, you have some questions? Speak. Ask the questions. Taslim asked whether the PBR is feasible for commercial shrimp hatcheries, and where is needed 10,000 to 20 tons algae per day, and what will be the cost for such a big setup? That's
Or
question.
20 tons of algae per day?
10 tons to 20 tons liters per day.
Oh, yeah, 10 tons in terms of liters, not 10 tons in terms of dry weight of algae. That's more in our wheelhouse. Yeah, so 20 tons.
Yeah, I mean, without getting into the details of the exact cell concentrations, our PBRs will produce algae at a density of 10 to 20 times what you get through traditional culture. And then they produce continuously. So a 1,250 liter PBR will produce somewhere in the range of 200 to 450 liters per day, depending on which strain you're growing. So essentially, if you need 10 tons of batch algae that's at a low density of traditional means, you can replace that with 1 ton worth of PBR algae, which could be as many as 5 if you're in the lower growth rate algae, but it could be as few as 2 in the higher growth rate algae. It really kind of depends on the specifics of what you're growing and how you grow it. But in general, a nice metric is kind of 10 to 20 times the density that you'd get out of a PBR that you would a traditional system.
Yeah, because we did this math for some shrimp farmers in Ecuador, and the density they were achieving with their algae, they were requiring 25 tons per day, but since it was on a 3-day batch, that actually required 75 tons of water, of which they were harvesting 25 tons per day. And one PBR replaced this entire field of giant tanks. So it ended up being 75,000 liters of water, or 75 tons of water, that was replaced by a single 1.2 ton PBR. I had to do the math a lot because it looked so, oh yeah, that's the picture. Yeah, so this is the comparison between what it replaces in terms of batch algae culture and then continuous bag culture. Cool, thanks, Sean.
Pleasure.
So, that answered the question.
For Louis Ledersman, what happens to the effluent of this bioreactor? Where do you discharge the effluent?
Yeah, so we don't really have effluent since, well, in terms of the liquid effluent, that's just sent in with the animals you're growing. So it's the algae mixed with the water, and that goes generally into a storage tank or a header tank, and then gets distributed to your larval animals from there. So there's no particular effluent, and then the only other effluent is gas, so which is just air you're pumping through the reactor, and then CO2, which is generally absorbed. So there's actually probably more oxygen coming out of the reactor than CO2.
From Taslim, he asked whether Trachyceros and Thalasseria can be cultured in the device.
Yeah, Jen can probably handle this one. She loves diatoms.
Yeah, that was actually the one that we just showed. You had Cattosterus muelleri in it right now. And yeah, we have customers who grow Thalassiocera as well. So yeah, lots of different people grow different kinds of diatoms in our reactors.
Yeah, Yeah, we avoided them in the first few years because we kept hearing they were really challenging, and then turns out they grow incredibly well in the bioreactor because we have such good control over the all the parameters of it, and diatoms are pretty, you know, they grow really fast and then crash because they didn't have enough, you know, CO2 or whatever they needed that day. So they're pretty easy to crash, but with the automated controls, and the first diatom we tried a few years ago when we finally decided to try them, ran for several months, and it was our first attempt at diatoms whatsoever. And so I've been actually very successful in our reactors.
Okay, we have one question from Vasumati. He was asking, press F5 of your presentation mode. I don't know who is the presenter. Is it you're asking from JP or from
I think that was previously in JP's presentation. So
okay, maybe
figure
JP.
that out well enough.
What was that?
Your slide number 5, I think.
Oh no, it's a shortcut to get into presentation mode. You
Okay.
just press F5 for next time.
Okay. Oh, you're saying us to press
perfect.
5 for
Thank
the slideshow. Okay. That's fine. One participant asked, what's the density in your system?
For me?
Maybe for Robert. What's the density? Sean can answer this question.
Yeah.
Density in our current system running Catosphorus or in general?
In general, I suppose. What's the density of?
Yeah, for like isochrys, Glaciosira.
Yeah, again, kind of a little bit of variability in terms of your exact strain, but something in the Thalassiosira pseudonana range would be in the kind of 20 to 25 million cells per day, or cells per milliliter, while harvesting, you know, somewhere in around a third of the reactor per day. If you're growing quickly, it can go up more like the 450 liters. The Thalassiosira westflogii is a much bigger diatom, so you get a much lower density, somewhere in the range of kind of 2 million cells per mil. We have customers who culturate around 4 or 5 million, but they're taking a very small amount per day out. So getting those higher volumes, you end up a little bit more diluted. Whereas the Catosphorus culture, for Muelleri, we sit, I don't know, it seems like it's pretty happy around 20 million cells per mil. And then an isochrysis, again, inverse to the amount you harvest, somewhere between 12 million cells per mil and 20 million cells per mil.
Yeah, and then for ISO, we had one of our clients who was hardly harvesting anything. So if you just let it sit and grow, he got it up to, I think it was 80 million cells per mil, Sean, is that right?
I think so, 60 or 80, but certainly something more ridiculous than I've ever heard before.
Or something like that. And then he said, well, I'm only harvesting, 5% a day or something like that. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. But if you're harvesting a reasonable amount, yeah, then it's down to 12 to 20 million cells per mil for ISO, like Sean was talking about. But if you want to let it ride out for a really thick batch, you can, and it will get incredibly dense. But your overall daily yield of cells is higher if you're flowing more water through and letting it actually grow well.
Okay, this gentleman from Vietnam, Mr. Xiang Lam Tam, he asked whether the Rotifer reactor is easy to use and how is the maintenance of the reactor for Rotifer?
And how is the maintenance? Was that the last part?
How's the maintenance issue on a Rotifer machine?
Yeah, apparently it's fairly easy to use. We're still improving the ergonomics of it before we release it to the public, but right now it's about 1 hour of manual labor per day, and we'll produce roughly 1 billion rotifers per day of L-type or 1.5 billion for S-type. And from people we've talked to, that amount of labor input is very low for producing much high quality rotifers. And on a continuous basis as well. So our initial trial we ran for 200 straight days. Producing that.
Okay. Mr. Vasumati, he asks, what is the surface area of this reactor? What kind of light is used for algae growth? How much increased productivity you are getting in this reactor compared with raceway ponds?
Here's the top search result.
Yeah, so the surface area, I don't know off the top of my head. It's huge. It has giant spikes that go in from every direction on the reactor. So yeah, it would take a lot of, actually we could figure it out and we probably have, but I don't have that number off the top of my head. Well, actually, no, if you had that as an actual just circular tank of that size, our surface area is 3 times as much as it would be if it was just a circular tank. In terms of raceway production, Sean, do you know the comparison of that? Most of our clients use either bags or large vats. So most of our, on the raceway sides.
I don't have a good comparison for raceway because raceway is such a dirty form of algae production that's open to the environment and contaminants. So it's not commonly compared to the PBRs for the most part. The height of the water is so variable that if you have 4 inches of water in there versus 18, it'll change everything.
Yeah, the raceways we experience, and some people do, like where our equipment plays in with raceways is if people have a raceway, they'll buy our equipment to scale up their lab culture, and then they can put essentially a giant amount of very clean inoculum in to kickstart their raceway. And so we have several industrial clients who use ours as a part of the seed train. And then the raceways run for longer, and when they're running, they're more productive. So yeah, they get higher yield per day, and they operate for a longer period of time because they've inoculated with a very strong, clean inoculum. So that's most of our interactions with raceways as opposed to competing with them. So I'm not actually sure, on the cell comparison.
Okay, we have one on the chat line. We have Stella Chia asking, what's the cost of this system? We use solar power for operating your system?
Yeah, so the base cost is 55,000 USD, and then you can also purchase installation or ongoing support and care packages and that type of thing. So yeah, 55,000 USD is at least a starting point. And then is the other question about ongoing cost for solar panels? What was the second part?
You can use solar power for your system.
You could, but you'd have to run it through a power inverter since our system requires DC power. So yeah, it can't run off DC power. The batteries you get off the solar thing, but if you had big enough batteries in an inverter, then yeah, you could.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can supply 2,400 watts a day of AC power, then or 2,400 watts continuously, not per day.
In your asked by Harinat, in your PBR 2,500, 2 reactors, can we grow 2 types of algae separately in the PBR 2,500?
Yeah, completely. So they're essentially completely separate systems with their own controls. They just share a header tank, so the pre-filtration tank that UV sterilizes and ultrafilters the water, they share that, but apart from that, they're completely separate units. You could have one of them empty, not running anything. Be running the other one, yeah.
Okay. From Vietnam, Chin Chao Hong. When the batch is harvested, do we have to prepare new algae to begin a new batch, new bath, or part of the algae previously bath is using?
Yeah, so most people will prepare a new batch. Most people don't harvest a full batch at once. The reactors are generally run on a continuous basis, so you inoculate. It takes about a week to scale up, and then you can run it from, depending on the cleanliness of your inoculum, it could run for 6 weeks, or people often get around 3 months. So in the 6 week, 3 month kind of range is reasonable. somebody told us this year they'd run theirs for 11 months straight, which was pretty crazy to hear. But in general, I mean, if you put a decent inoculum in, you're going to get 2 months of production out of it. So we generally don't just scale it up and then harvest the whole batch. We usually just pull about 30 to 40% out every day for 2 straight months. So generally at the end of 2 or 3 months, you want to flush it out, run the spray cleaning system, and then restart with some fresh clean algae to give yourself another 2 or 3 months after that.
I think Tony Charles still have one question. Will this DVR come with a chiller, or do you recommend air-conditioned lab, as it's very hot and humid in northern Australia?
Yeah, it does come with a chiller, although you still need to put it in a reasonable temperature room. The chiller works to cool all the heat that goes in from the lights, but if you want to run your algae culture at a reasonable temperature, like 24 degrees Celsius, then you should have it in a climate-controlled room. If you're okay to run it at 30 degrees Celsius, some Nanochloropsis and some things are okay with that, then you can have it in a hotter environment. But in general, we recommend having a climate-controlled room, even though it does have a chiller with it, as well as a heater, so it can handle a little colder temperatures as well.
We can also add the high temperature model chiller in extreme cases where it's impossible.
Yeah, we have the option of, if we know your ambient temperature, we can add additional chilling to the unit to compensate for that, if you let us know ahead of time. It's more challenging to do after the fact.
Okay, from Diego Flores, what combination of lights do you use? What is the influence of different colors on the growth of the culture?
Yeah, so that's something we've researched a lot and are still researching after 10 years. So that's a real tricky one. We 7 different colors of LEDs to make our chosen spectrum. But through experimentation, we found to produce the best growth results. So we get custom LED panels made with exactly the spectrum that we want. And in terms of how it affects the growth, drastically. But there's so many variables in light that's a long discussion. We want to really get into it.
In short, Jen actually started with us doing our light experimentation and found that the LEDs we went with grow algae about 2.2 times faster than regular fluorescent bulbs normalized for the same amount of light.
Yeah.
One question from Tyler Jaturon. Fill up plankton seed only for the first time, or have we to fill the plankton seed every day?
No, just once every, on average, once every 6 weeks to 3 months, you'd have to refill the plankton seed. So yeah, once you seed it with the algae, then you just let it scale up for a week, and then after a week, you can start harvesting just 30 or 40% every day. And then after 6 weeks to 3 months, you'll drain it out, run the spray cleaning system, and then add your seed culture again. Yeah, so certainly not every day wouldn't work.
Okay, there are not many questions. Dr. Jatin Amonka, do you have any questions? Okay, there's one question from Ramraj. Being a continuous system, how do you prevent microbial contamination in the culture?
Yeah, so we do that by starting off with a sealed clean tank. So yeah, the entire tank is sealed to the outside environment, and then we run a detergent through it, whether it's a caustic or an acid, just to remove biofilm, and then usually finish with a bleach step just to actually sterilize the tank after it removes the biofilm. Put some thiosulfate in, which is standard aquaculture, for neutralizing bleach. And then as long as you start with a clean inoculum, So the inoculum goes through, as Jen showed you, through a peristaltic pump. So it doesn't, the inoculum doesn't come in contact with the outside world. It just gets sucked into the tank through a peristaltic pump. And then after that, there's micron filters for the air going into the tank, as well as the CO2 passes through that. And there's also a micron filter for the water coming into the tank. So 0.1 micron autoclavable filter. And upstream of that, we have our standard tank that comes with our units, unless people requested it doesn't. But in general, we have a tank with ultra filters on it and a UV sterilizer to pre-sterilize the water before it even gets to our 0.1 filter going into the tank. So essentially we take everything out of everything that's going into the tank. All the media is filtered down to 0.1 as it enters the tank.
If we do not have any questions, that's another 3 minutes before I close the session. If no questions, I will close the session. Okay, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you Robert, JP, Hastey, John, Ashley for presenting your Algae Bioreactor. It was a beautiful presentation. I think most of us understand in a way. We probably can have another presentation if there's a lot of inquiries or questions. That should be no problem. We should be also presenting our Rotifer machine in our next presentation when Robert is ready to show to the world. Yeah, we are all waiting. We are all waiting in Singapore.
I know we're not as much. Okay. The algae, we were like, all right, we're a young business. We have to start selling them now. Like, I want to make this perfect before I start giving it to people. So I'm holding on to it for a little bit. But
anyway, it's a good presentation. At least we know what is a photobioreactor. And, nobody really understands that. I've got so many inquiries from the web. They say it's a toy, you know. So I was trying, and somebody say it's a robot. So that's why I try to hold this webinar so that everybody understands. I think this is a good presentation, and thank you, Robert, Ashley, JP, especially Sean. Okay, and it's time for us to say goodbye from Singapore to Canada, wherever you are. Goodbye.
Night.
Thanks for organizing this,
and have a great day. Yeah. Okay. Bye bye.